My guest in first.
Go in there and get your guests in there. And you bring them in.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Depending on where you are, I'm Lady Lori Blackman, and welcome back to Correllians Live Telethon. I am going to get our guest ready. If you give me one moment. Okay. So welcome. I just wanted to go over a few things with you. For this session, for the next 2 hours, we will have a special incentive for anybody that donates. I'm going to say the first 13 people that donate will receive a witch's bottle. I have 2 of them here in person to show you what they look like. These are really great little bottles. So if you go to Correllians.live/donate, make a donation within the next 2 hours, you can receive one of these. These bottles are great. They have a little piece of metal right here that if you put liquid in them, the cork will not absorb it. So it's fantastic, fantastic little thing. And the bottles are empty. They will come to you empty. Yes. There are multiple colors, so you will not get to choose a color. And let's see if I can get up the photo. No, my photo does not want to show. I apologize. Okay, but you're getting to see them. They are in multiple colors, multiple shapes. They're really cute. So first 13 people to make a donation during this will get a bottle. Now, without further ado, I'm going to bring on today's guest. And here we have her. Yay!
Yay! Got it all figured out.
We have it all figured out now. Yay. So I'm actually going to swap that with you. Okay, how do I make you large and me small?
Oh, well, we've got that.
There we go. That works for now until I figure that out. Okay, we want to maximize you. There we go.
Hey, there we go.
It's all about you. So everyone,
max out.
Yeah. So Federa, hi, how are you? It's so wonderful to have you.
It's wonderful. Just for the record, it's Phaedra.
Phaedra.
Yep. And very happy to be here.
Awesome. So what are you going to be talking about today?
Well, I want to talk about some things that have very much interested me over the years, which is partially how the brain works, how culture works, and how that's going to impact on our ideas of witchcraft and paganism. And it's sort of where we get our ideas and how that processes in our brains and comes out the other end. So,
and that is the Cauldron of Story.
Yes, the Cauldron of Story, exactly. And the Cauldron of Story, I got the phrase from J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote an essay in the 1940s called On Fairy Stories. And he used this image in it. He's talking about how with fairy stories, the moment that it's told and recorded reflects that time and what has happened up to that time. And later versions may differ, but they're always going to, there's going to be a thread, like as if all versions of the story, all things that are relative to it, got thrown in a big cauldron. And the storyteller just kind of scoops out the bits they want. But it's like in the 70s and 80s, you got a lot of feminist retelling of fairy stories. And they wouldn't make any sense if you didn't know the original fairy story. So a lot of what we take for granted in witchcraft and magic and paganism and things, it's all affected by everything that went before, and not just witchy things. It's affected by the media. It's affected by the political climate we find ourselves in. It's affected by the fact that we're in North America and not in the UK. All those things make an impression on what we're doing. And what comes out the other end is never a pure thing. It's all part of that. Nothing comes from a vacuum. Every new religion is pulling on stuff that came before. And sometimes what came before, that they say, oh, well, I'm just clarifying this religion that's been here all along. Or, well, I'm just reviving this religion that was lost. And a lot of our modern paganism ideas come from that reviving something that was lost, except what was lost doesn't look anything at all like what we're doing now. Nobody was casting circles and calling quarters on top of the Acropolis. We have woven together all those millennia before us and come out with what we've got now. And a lot of this is what we can call the narrative. And I've been very interested in narrative for quite a long time. We have a lot of narratives. Conspiracy theorists have narratives. And they're not very happy if you try to give them information that doesn't fit their narrative. We have narratives. We accept a lot of things as fact without thinking on it at all, because it's part of our narrative. It can also be called your worldview. And most people are pretty oblivious to how this chart changes. You can, as in the example of the feminist retelling of fairy tales, you can consciously reject part of the narrative. But the fact that you have to consciously reject it means it did come to mind. It was part of what got fished out of the cauldron. And this is very pervasive, as I said, in daily life. You got the conspiracy theorists. You have news stories. A lot of people don't realize that editors will kind of decide on a narrative thread and then send the reporters out to find that thread, which is sometimes how news gathering and journalism goes astray, because they're so conscious on the narrative that they think is going to make sense that they miss stuff that's right in front of it. And of course, the police do that too. They decide how something is, and they try to find what fits the narrative. Reality show producers, they come up with narratives all the time. Who's going to be the bad guy? Who's going to be the good guy? Who's going to be the nice one? And again, it's not really commonly known how much the producers, who are often real people right there on the set, are shaping the narrative of the program for us. So when you see those little single interviews where they look like they're sharing their thoughts, very often, right off camera, there is a producer who has said, okay, can you say this in this way? Can you make a complete sentence out of that? I hear you saying this. Can you say that to the camera? And it all gets shaped. But it comes off as reality, even though it's a story. So a narrative in many ways is the way we explain our lives to ourselves. And the outcome of that narrative can be very, very different. like I was saying, our narrative worldview, very, very similar concepts. Let's say, I was thinking of this earlier. Let's say you say, I lead such a fortunate life. I get so many lucky breaks. And someone else can have the same experiences and say, my life sucks. I never get anywhere unless I get a lucky break. And so there's two different narratives to describe the same events. And interesting thing, if you really want to know what somebody's narrative is or their worldview is, listen for when they say always or never. Because when they say this always happens to me or this never happens to me, they're telling you something very profound about the way they very deeply believe the world works for them.
Mm.
So a lot of ideas that we have about modern paganism, contemporary paganism, stuff that's going on right now, owes a whole heck of a lot to stuff in the past. And it's funny because obviously I'm not the younger generation anymore. But a lot of times people who have been around, 30, 40, 50 years, we look at what the newer people are into, and it's like we're baffled. And part of that is because we set up our narrative and we set up our worldview way longer ago, 20th century stuff. And 20th century is in a big way, but there's new stuff on top of that too. But if you don't understand the 20th century stuff, a lot of things just aren't going to make sense. So let's see. Religion is another thing. Let me hold that off on that. But nothing comes in a vacuum. And the cauldron, that's the stories we're telling about ourselves. We're shaping it. There's a thing used to be, I don't know if they still do it, but this used to be a thing that I heard of in the 20th century about restaurants in France. And what they would do is, I once asked a chef about, brown sauce or something, that what exactly that was. And he was telling me that in old school restaurants in France at that mid-century time, there would be a big old pot on the back of the stove. And remember, this all started too when it was wood-fired stoves, which always had that warm spot. That's the origin of crock pot cooking. So they would have a big pot on the back of the stove, and useful bits of things would go into that pot. And when they needed a brown sauce, they just scoop it out. And some of those pots had been going continually for like 100 years. They just kept throwing new stuff in it. But you can't ever totally erase of the flavors that were in it, even after 100 years. There's still traces of those flavors. And so what went into the cauldron of the stories about ourselves that we believe about ourselves, it shapes and flavors everything we scoop out of it now. So what is being scooped out in the 21st century still carries the 20th century with it. And maybe folks of my more old school type, we get confused because we're not familiar with the newer flavors as they went in. We're just blissfully going around thinking it's just going to be just like it was. Actually, it's interesting because when my late husband passed away, he had a contract to write a book, Essential Guide to Neo-Paganism. And after he passed, I talked with the publisher and thought, well, maybe I could do it, And then I started looking at things and I started reading contemporary blogs. This was about 12 years ago, and looking at a lot of the online world that was radically different than it was, obviously, in the 20th century. And I realized all of the ideas that we had that were givens about witchcraft world and the neo-pagan world had become so much broader and shifted so much that we really couldn't say, well, all pagans mostly believe in the, as an earth religion or fertility religion or any of those things. Nope, it just wasn't true anymore. And especially the way witchcraft has been pictured, I mean, it's very, very different from the witchcraft Wicca that we knew. I mean, when I was first getting into stuff, which would have been the 80s, 80s with other people as opposed to 70s with written materials, there was a very clear idea that you couldn't call yourself a witch unless you'd been initiated into a coven by a proper person who could trace their lineage back to Gerald Gardner. And, you just didn't go around calling yourself a witch if those circumstances didn't match up. And I remember at one point, one of the advantages of getting into this stuff earlier is you're closer to the people who thought stuff up. I remember at one point I realized that through one of my initiatory lineages, the priestess who initiated me and the priestess who initiated her and the priestess who initiated her, that third one back was only a degree or two away from Gerald Gardner. And it wasn't a Gardnerian witchcraft initiation that I received, but it was from Gerald. When I later got a non-standard Gardnerian initiation, I could trace. I mean, there was like 6 people between me and Gerald Gardner. And according to a strict Gardnerian witchcraft thing, there are many that disagree whether I got a Gardnerian initiation or not, but that's okay. But I could trace to Gerald Gardner from 2 lines. And at that point I said, why the hell don't I call myself a witch? What's the point? Now, you buy a hat and you're a witch. You post on Instagram and you're a witch. And with us, it was so much more fraught, so much more, is it okay if I use this or not? That's got to be totally foreign to the younger generation today. Excuse me. You'll have to excuse me. I have a chronic cough. And it just sets off randomly.
And it's from talking a lot as well.
Yeah, probably. But it will take care of itself. And just hang in there with me.
We're hanging with you.
Great. Right. So let me see. I've got them on my little note cards here.
Awesome.
I'm a busy little prep person. So right there's a great example of how the concept of witch changed, but we're still got it. And, part of that is with the cauldron. See, we cannot pretend that the movie The Craft did not happen.
No, unfortunately, it happened.
And we cannot pretend that Buffy or Sabrina or Charmed did not happen. So they're all in the cauldron, and they're all part of what anybody accessing the cauldron now is going to taste, is going to feel, is going to find out about it. That's
now I understand what you mean.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. In another gift from the movies is this idea of having powers, that there's a supernatural element to becoming a witch, that if you have gifts, whatever those are defined at, often as psychic gifts, that means you're a witch. But as my friend Catchy Cole, who wrote Psychic Skills for Magic and Witchcraft, says, no, a psychic is not a witch. And a witch is not automatically a psychic either. They can be both, but it's not automatic. And, saying like, wow, sometimes I have prophetic dreams, or sometimes I have clairvoyance. those are things, wonderful things to build on and to work with. But that doesn't mean you're doing witchcraft. Witchcraft's a little more complicated than that. And I see a note from somebody, was there more willpower in witchcraft back then? I think in the sense of understanding that you were shaping things with your will, and as I will, so motivate, was probably more understood. Partially because back in the day, there were simply fewer people and it was more concentrated what everybody was doing. It wasn't so diffused through media and social media mostly. So you had a little more intensity. You had, God knows, there were hardly any books. So you had people more reliant on being taught from each other. And so in that sense, yeah, because you were taught about willpower and using it. Now, I don't think there's much of an idea. This idea of intentions is, well, you put your intention into something. And I know that boat has sailed. Nobody's going to stop saying intentions. I hear it used very casually. But I'm not in non-witchcraft circles. I hear this putting intentions in things. But I don't think there's a lot of understanding that what you're supposed to be doing with the intention is your willpower. You're supposed to be putting energy, your will, into what's happening. And that has it's not real clear to witches who have not had the opportunity to learn from God. I came up in the 80s in Chicago, and I have to say, I cannot believe my good fortune in having done so, because it was such a learned community, and people really were doing the stuff. And I marvel now on how lucky I was to stumble into that kind of training and that kind of study. And it's just not around very much anymore. It probably wasn't
That's
around
unfortunate.
That much. Yeah, it probably wasn't
so
around
unfortunate.
that much then. But because it was where I was and what I was in the middle of it, my sense was that, everything's like this, because that's all I knew.
Yes. Okay. So we are almost at the bottom of the half hour. So I'm going to take a small break, and you can go grab yourself some water, and we are going to play a video.
Thanks.
The Parliament of World Religions is coming to Chicago, Illinois in August 2023, and the Sacred Order of Paladins and Correllian Nativist Church are working towards attending to represent the pagan community, but we need your help. Attending Parliament is paramount for not just the Correllian tradition, but the pagan community as a whole. So in an effort to secure the funds to send as many Correllians to Parliament as possible, we will be holding the Road to Parliament 2022 Correllians Live Telethon. 100 hours of magic and community. The telethon will be from October 6th to the 10th and will be jam-packed with discussion panels, workshops, and performances, as well as booking readings with psychic readers and an online auction. Our goal is to raise $10,000, and with your help, we know we can get there. We need you to get involved. We are looking for readers, presenters, performers, and hosts to take part in this telethon. To inquire about taking part in this monumental event, please email correllianslive@gmail.com. Be it a monetary donation or a donation of your time, we thank you. We'll see you at 8 p.m. on the 6th for the 2022 Correllians Live Telethon. Spread the word, share this video, and let's get the Correllians and Paladins on the road to Parliament. The Road to Parliament 2022 Correllians Live Telethon is sponsored and operated by the Correllian Nativist Church, a 501c3 religious organization. For more information, go to Correllian.com.
We're back.
Hi. So I'm seeing some questions coming up in the chat, and I'm going to try and address those a little later.
Yes.
because there are a couple other points that I want to make. So just so people know, hey, I see what you're saying, and I'll try to address it once I get through some of these points that I'd like to make. Going back to the idea of the cauldron, I used to use the metaphor, which is actually pretty useful too, that Western esotericism, which is all this stuff that comes down to us and from Europe and everything that influenced Europe, is a tapestry of many threads. And each one of us, when you weave in new threads, it's modifying the whole piece. And the recent threads would fall right out if it wasn't woven in with the pre-existing one. So we're always weaving that tapestry, and it's never quite the same. You can go back 100 years on the tapestry, and you can't create that, because the world has done a lot of things in 100 years. You know, I mean, good grief, you don't have to go back that far to have 100 years, and women were just first getting the right to vote in our country. So there's a lot of things that we can't go back to that exact point. We have to weave and modify as we're going along. One of the things that really, I want to look at some of the history of some of these ideas and the history of some of the stuff that went into the cauldron. In the late 1800s, 1878, there was a group started in England called the Folklore Society. And this was basically upper class people with time on their hands. You know, that was the cool thing about being upper class. You get to have time on your hands and money to spend. And they were amateur historians in the sense that amateur, they did it out of love, not because they were making any money at it. But they would go around the UK and they would look for traditional folk practices, and they would record them. And that Folklore Society newsletter or magazine is still around. The organization is still around. But as so many of us do, they saw things through their lens of what they were. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in Europe such that leads up to this. I highly recommend looking at Ronald Hutton's Triumph of the Moon for a history of ideas that fed into things like the Folklore Society. Their thing got to be that everything was a pagan leftover. The history of these things, not so much. I mean, now when they can, you know, have better ways of finding records and compiling things and finding things, greater access to things because of the internet and such, they find out maybe this particular little parade with deer antlers that they did in this little town, it's not a leftover from pagan days. What it is something they thought it was cool in the 1500s. And that's when it started. And then they just kept going. The funny part about it is, and this was the Folklore Society's biggest impact, is the upper class people would tell them, oh, this is a pagan leftover. This is, your town has been doing this since pagan times. And people were like, oh, we didn't know that. Okay, cool. And now, even in some of these towns where they have documentary evidence that they can prove something wasn't done until the 1500s, you can go into the little village's history museum, and they will tell you, oh, yes, we've been doing this since pagan times. It was very hard to erase an idea once it gets in there, even if it's wrong. In England, for 150 years in English textbooks teaching generations of kids, they said Stonehenge was built by the Druids. That's why you have Druid things going on now at Stonehenge. Now we know it's maybe a couple of thousand years before Druids existed anywhere, much less in England. But that connection between Druids and Stonehenge is not going to go away anytime soon. It's always going to be part of the story cauldron for Stonehenge and for Druids. If you use any of those things, you're going to be dealing with that. Now, you may know better and you may be very scholarly about this stuff and everything. That's cool. But the next time you're talking to somebody casually, you've got to allow for the fact that they have those things in their story narrative. Okay. Another one was, this is another one you can't pretend it didn't exist. Margaret Murray. Margaret Murray wrote some books in the very early 20th century, Witch Cult in Western Europe, and The God of the Witches. If I'm getting this wrong, I know someone will correct me. The top of my head is not always as reliable as it used to be. But she wrote the idea that, and which I'm sure was influenced, there's a two-way influence with the Folklore Society, that the witch trials were actually, they were trying women who were part of a underground pagan religion that had held on since pre-Christianity. Her books were not just influential amongst people who are interested in this stuff. They were bestsellers in England. Bestsellers. And it's like Stonehenge being made by the Druids. That was really, really enculturated. People like Gerald Gardner, it's like, this is true. She's saying this stuff, and it's true. And their work reflects that bit that was thrown into the stew. And we just can't pretend that that didn't happen. We may think we know better, but I mean, look at the 80s and 90s. You had that song, The Burning Times. That is really, really, really the idea of the burning times, the idea of persecution, that it was not just a persecution for the complex reasons that it might have been for the theological reasons and all that. No, it was because it was a surviving pagan religion, and they knew that, and that's why they persecuted. So therefore, if we are telling stories of our own persecution, and the persecution myth is huge in modern paganism, witchcraft, we're feeding off of that. Now, in my case, I've been an out pagan. God, I remember telling my dad I was a pagan in like the end of the 70s. And I have never felt persecuted. I have never, I mean, there are things that there are people who don't like me. What are you going to do? I used to have a store, and, you know, where we sold occult stuff. And I personally feel like I was never persecuted. Heck, when I lived in North Carolina, we were doing public rituals in the basement meeting rooms of the public library in Kernersville, North Carolina. And the thing is, maybe I was, but I gave it no value. You know, it's like, oh, that's just them. You know. Other people take a rejection or my mother won't like this really, really, really to heart. So again, this is the narrative. We could be having the same experiences. And in my mind, you know, I've been open all the time. It's, you know, it's hardly been that big a deal. Whereas somebody else is like, it's been crushing. And there's obviously times when bad things happen to people for all kinds of crazy reasons. And, but the narrative somewhat shapes that. And because of the persecution narrative, thank you, Margaret Murray, that can be a very, very persistent piece. Another thing we cannot overlook from the 20th century, excuse me, is the influence of feminist spirituality on our origin stories, where we came from. Thank you, Margaret Murray. And how we interpret our own history. Now, in the 70s, I was around feminist spirituality people in the 70s. And they're very fascinated about learning that there were goddesses. Holy crap. And at this time, now, Starhawk's book, Spiral Dance, was published in 1979, at the Halloween 1979. And in it, she was one of the people who talked about it being women's religion. And Z Budapest also talked about it being women's religion. And that was really not a thing so much before that. It was in this feminist group. But that feminist group didn't really cross-pollinate with more general pagans until the 70s. And a lot of stuff that we take for granted, like the goddess, that was really a huge influence from feminist spirituality. I remember reading Gerald Gardner's books and thinking, he's not talking anywhere about the goddess. How odd. And then my experience with that was that we redefined stuff. Feminine spirituality came into us, and that did change a lot of our perceptions and that obvious stuff. It also, the book, what was it? Midwives, Witches, Midwives, and Healers. Oh gosh, I should have looked it up. But it was about how the witches who were persecuted were just these gals at the edge of the forest who had a lot of herbal knowledge and all that stuff. And they were the ones, and they were pretty, and everybody hated that. And that's why they were persecuted as witches. Well, there's a lot of flaws in that whole story, which I don't even want to get into. But it's a lot of stuff, history. But it gave us this idea of the pretty girl or the old lady at the edge of the forest who knew all this stuff. And what I kind of laugh about is because a lot of the stuff that the old lady or pretty woman at the edge of the forest knew was just common knowledge, because they might have had some specialized stuff, but use of herbs and a lot of those things, it's just something everybody did, because what other alternatives did you have? And there's a thing that you will find now. Of course, not everybody was literate at those times, but is a common thing for the bigger households that you'll find household receipt books, and receipt as earlier word for recipe. And what you would find in these household recipe books surviving from Middle Ages in Europe and through were all kinds of herbal stuff. What do you do when somebody gets a thorn? What do you do when this happens? What do you do if somebody's got diarrhea? All that stuff would be written down. And then as the household over the generations would go, they would inherit those. Sounds a lot like a book of shadows. It's all handwritten. But those things were relatively common, and they did exist. So it wasn't like nobody but the one at the edge of the forest had this knowledge. There was a lot of general knowledge out there. So on closest examination, that whole piece of it falls. However, it lives on in memes.
So we are going to take a 5-minute video break, and we will be right back.
Okay.
Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse. I am the first priest and chancellor of the Correllian nation of Wicca, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the Road to Parliament 22 Correllians Live Telethon, 100 hours of magic and community. We're here to ask you to help us as we send a contingent to the Parliament of the World's Religions in August of 2023. We're going to give voice to you and to our community. During this 100 hours, our goal is to raise at least $10,000, and you can help us to do that. We humbly ask that you go to Correllians.live/donate and give what you can. Then share this telethon and make sure those in your spheres know where and when to watch. Again, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the show.
On August 14th to 18th, 2023, the 9th Parliament of the World's Religions will convene in the city of Chicago. They are calling us together for a call to conscience, defending freedom and human rights. People and representatives of nearly all religions and faiths will be there to answer this call. And here is one of 6 reasons you should attend. Number 3, breathtaking performances of music, dance, and the arts. Every kind of religious and cultural music, dances, and art fill the 5 days. The Parliament presents beautiful, colorful, intimate, and spectacular performances in many languages from many cultures. The display of the heart, in essence, the freedom of expression, will be on full display. Consider your commitment to defending freedom and human rights and attend the 9th convening of the Parliament of the World's Religions. If you wish to join the pagans in the Parliament, we have a special rate at Correllian.com, or just click the link in the description. Blessed be everybody.
What are you most looking forward to at the Parliament of the World's Religions?
What I am looking forward for the Parliament of World Religion 2023 is that the Parliament will bring me in so that I could meet my Correllian family. It's been a long time that I've been following the Parliament World Religion and the Correllian tradition through Magic TV. But this time, with your help, and I'm really hoping that you could help me to be at the Parliament of World Religion 2023. So this is what I'm looking forward to meet you and be in person with you at the Parliament of World Religion.
Why do we need representation at the Parliament?
Our attendance means something essential. By participating in conversations around the ways we can defend our freedoms and human rights, we can make a difference. By standing with our faith community and as a people of spirit, we can allow your voice to be heard in a unique way.
Who are the Sacred Order of Paladins?
The Order of Paladins is a service-oriented order dedicated to assisting our communities in moving towards a better, more sustainable stewardship of Mother Earth. And we are also dedicated to preserving Gaian culture today in order to support our civilization in the future.
Why support the Paladins?
Because we have had representation at every modern parliament, and we want to continue and expand on that with those of us who are attending in 2023.
What is the money going to be used for?
Most of the money we are looking to raise with our $10,000 minimum goal will go towards housing costs. Our plan is to house and feed all of us together for the week of the Parliament. Whatever money that remains when this goal is met will go towards bringing honored paladins in from other countries who would otherwise not have the opportunity to attend the Parliament. One such paladin is Reverend Sir Rolando Camon, whom we fondly call Apu Adman.
But we can't do it alone.
And that's ultimately why we are here, because we need your help. Thank you so much for watching and contributing in whatever way you can. Please donate to our cause at Correllians.live/donate. Like our video feeds and share so that others can join us in watching what we have planned for you throughout these 4 incredible days and nights.
And we are back. There we go.
Yep, everything's going now. Okay, let me take a little side trip here to talking a little bit more about the cauldron of the 20th century. And I did mention, at one point I owned a bookstore, metaphysical bookstore, and it was in the 90s. And I remember pointing out to a customer how almost everything in the Wicca witchcraft neo-pagan section have been published since 1990. There are a few things from the 80s, but almost everything there was from 1990. And you look at the older 20th century magical books, and they are quite different. Some people call them weird. Some people call them shocking. This isn't right. Well, it was right at the time. There were things. One of my all-time favorites is L.G. Manning, who teaches wonderful magical techniques, but in ways now that we think is very ethical in terms of manipulating other people or manipulating situations. And manipulation is much more frowned now than it was mid-century. But, you can reject some of that way of doing it. I'm going to put a spell on my boss so he does this thing or whatever. It's the way he constructs the spells and goes about it is just solid. And there's a lot of stuff like that out there that people say, oh, this, witches never do these things. It's part of the cauldron. But you could learn a lot from that stuff. And there are some stuff, my God, origin stories, where we came from. I don't know how many of you anymore are familiar with Alex Sanders. Yes. Gerald Gardner started Gardnerian Wicca. Alex Sanders started the founder of Alexandrian Wicca. And I had his biography written in like 1972, floating around the library for ages, and I finally pulled it out and read it, and it is, I swear to God, it's shocking. I don't know how else to say. He was initiated by his grandmother, and it was a sexual initiation and all this stuff. That now it would just be jaw-dropping. The reason that it was written that way is not because that's the way it happened then and it doesn't happen the way now. What he put in his book was what was expected from an origin story then. So a lot of things that we find now is what is expected, rather than, and expectations, where do they come from? The cauldron. Another accident of the 20th century is the infamous threefold return. That whatever you do as a witch is going to come back to you 3 times. So if you do good, it'll come back 3 times. And if you do bad, it'll come back 3 times. Except for the part that anyone with their eyes open could see that this does not happen in fact. That rotten things can happen to really wonderful people, and really rotten people can get ahead in life far more than we think they should. And I know people who will say karma and all that. Yeah, well, that's over a lot of lifetimes. It's not an immediate cause and effect. Where this came from, accident of the 20th century, Ray Buckland and his then wife Rosemary were the ones who brought Gardnerian witchcraft from the UK into the US. And around 1970, 72, there was just an explosion of articles in the popular media. At those times you didn't have your websites, you had magazines that came out weekly or monthly, but weekly magazines like Life Magazine, Time, Saturday Evening Post, all those. That was the way ideas got spread around. And the way I first had any clue about the idea of Gardnerian witchcraft was from an article in 1964 in Life Magazine. My family's a Life Magazine. So anyway, in one of these interviews, they talked to Rosemary and Ray Buckland, and they said later, they couldn't remember which one said it, but the reporter asked something along the lines of, aren't you afraid that people will think you're hexing them? And one of them, I don't remember which one, said, oh, no, we don't worry about that, because, you know, witches believe that if we do a hex, it'll come back on us 3 times. And that is totally off the cuff. It was sort of like, I'm going to tell this reporter something that will get him off the topic, and when people read that, they'll feel safer about witches. Nothing to, wasn't in the Gardner's writings or anything like that. It just kind of came up like that. But now it's inescapable. And a lot of witches do not subscribe to it, but the idea out of the cauldron is inescapable. To jump back, partially where that idea came from, if it came from anywhere, was a book, again, right at the turn of the last century, a book called Aradia, which was published in 1899 by a folklorist. And he supposedly had an informant in Italy who gave him all of these documents about Tuscan witches. And he translated them. And in it, Aradia is queen of the witches. She's daughter of Diana, who's the moon, and she's queen of the witches, and she comes and teaches them. And one of the things she tells her witch folk is that if the local priest or landowners are being pissy to you, go be pissy 2 times back. Give back 2 times what they gave to you, and then they'll know to leave the witches alone. That's a really, really, really different take than what's been put through the cauldron in 100 years since then. But it gives you a little perspective on the more transgressive nature of witchcraft that is a little, makes people uncomfortable now. Let's see, I think we've pretty much talked about that. Another thing we can't pretend didn't exist is the MCU, the Marvel word. And I heard Bill Nye in a show just a few days ago. I was watching this, and he said there was a god of thunder before he was a hunk. And right now, you would be sore pressed to take the idea of the Marvel Thor out of the popular imagination. And even people who are very sincere, or, you know, have the idea of what actual statuary of the period looked like for Thor and Odin stuff, they're still going to have to deal with the MCU's presence in the popular imagination, and it may be coloring their imagination more than they realize too. So, I talked about the threefold return and all that. Power of Three is another one from the movies and TV. This is a little bit of my pet peeve. The candles. I think it was in The Craft where they first showed it, where the witch puts her hand and there's like 100 pillar candles there, and they all light up, which we all thought was a pretty cool thing to do, even though we know you can't do that. And now every historical drama, every witchy thing, they have the set decorated with all these pillar candles. They didn't exist until the 20th century. In the olden days, they used dipped candles or molded candles with one wick. And having such a big fat candle was a incredible waste of wax and resources. Candles were really expensive. Poor people probably didn't have candles. They used their fire for light. Around the Mediterranean, it was mostly oil lamps rather than candles. But now it's just absolutely there in the DNA of all the TV shows and the set dressers from now until then, that, you know, you didn't light a room without a cluster of pillar candles. So bless their hearts, but when you see it, just roll your eyes, because I'll be doing the same thing. Anyway, so the well of memes. Talk about all the stuff that went into the cauldron. And then what about the memes? Now, the cauldron represents all the flavor, all the different types of things that came to this point. Memes, I think, reflect how the cauldron is expressing itself at any given time. So it's more current. And what we share in memes and what we put into memes that says that's talking about our narrative. That is who we say we are. So you got the pretty goth girl in the foggy woods, you know, that's narrative. That's coming out of the well. And that goes back to that whole feminist thing with the pretty girl at the edge of the woods. Occasionally you will see old ladies in these memes, not that often. Occasionally you will see men. I did a whole collection, excuse me, of Facebook memes for a presentation at PantheaCon one year. And there were some memes of male witches. They looked like guys off the cover of romance novels. They didn't really look like the average guys that I know of in witchcraft. And oh God, this whole idea that witchcraft is just for women. No, What did I just mention? Some of the big important people. You had Gerald Gardner. You had Alex Sanders. You had a lot of men who were extremely influential. But by the 80s and 90s, it's just like, oh no, this is just women. Never was. Not to say you can't have a little side thing, but the witchcraft through the ages, the only reason that a lot of men didn't get executed for witchcraft is because they were executed for heresy instead. And women were not considered to be intellectually capable of being heretics. So it is a very, very complex field. I hate to make generalizations. Another thing that comes from the well of memes is they stole it from the pagans. And it kind of comes down to the bits in the cauldron, okay? People like to keep going, doing things that they're used to doing. And especially if you think about times, I mean, we're all living in decades of very rapid change. That was not so for most of human history. So, you know, my dad did it and my grandpa did it and my great grandma did it and we're going to do it. The reasons, the story, the narrative behind why that thing is done can be changed. But it's not necessarily because anybody stole it. It's because people wanted to keep doing it. So rather than say, no, you can't do it anymore, because that never works. Gradually over time, the story for why something is done has changed. So people can keep doing the thing that they like to do. Happens all through history because that's the way people are. I look at this too, especially with Yule and Christmas, because you will have contemporary pagans swear up and down and backwards that they don't observe Christmas, except for the tree and the presents and all of these things. A lot of this stuff, I mean, who stole from who at this point? It's a thing. And why? Because most of us grew up with Christmas and we like it, and it's pretty and it's fun and you get presents, and we don't want to stop doing it. So we changed the explanation about it so we can keep doing the same thing we've been doing all along. Everything steals from everything, because remember, nothing comes from a vacuum. Everything is based on what went before. Oh, I already talked about that. Let's see. Oh, somebody said they are Jewish and have never done Christmas. Well, that's because it wasn't part of your culture, your world. For a lot of people, in a majority culture here in the United States, which is, let's face it, is the majority religion is Christianity. And there is a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not religious, but non-religious imagery and push and everything for the gift-giving winter holiday. It's real easy to just keep doing what you're used to doing. You may do something from your other religions or other things that you grew up with that you recast and you tell now as a pagan story.
Mm.
And that's perfectly fine because that's the way this works in human history. Let's see. Some of what I'm talking about, this idea of narrative and this idea of we like things to be the way we expect things to be, affects the way we think about the gods, the way we think about religion, and the way we think about mythology. I remember my first magical teacher used to say the difference between us and Christians is we know our myths are myths. And there is a certain level of truth to that. Fact is that mythology doesn't tell us much about religion. I read a lot of mythology in my youth, a lot of it. And I'm sure that opened the door to a lot of the stuff that I wound up doing as an adult. But mythology doesn't really tell us about religion. If I want to find out what the Greeks and the Romans and the Sumerians did as religious observances and how they did it and what they thought of the theological sense of it, I'm not going to find it in the mythological stories. And the same thing goes for Christianity. If you had someone who was never exposed to a church and gave them the New Testament to read, and then they went to a church, it'd be very confusing because those myths, those stories do not tell us the actual mechanics of how worship was done or what was expected of the worshiper when they would come and attend these things, or if there was even anything we would recognize as a worship service.
Right.
You know, a lot of times on big religious holidays, the general people, I mean, they might be hanging around outside the temple, but it was the priests who went inside and did the stuff. And it was usually often in some sort of sanctum sanctorum, which meant it was super, super sacred. And only the priest got to go in there. And what they did in there, nobody knows, unless the average person would know, unless it was written down. So the whole thing of the way a witch's circle is, or a pagan worship, contemporary, of course, all that mythology that I read, it didn't do means for me figuring out how this would work as worship.
Okay, Fedra, we're going to take another 5-minute break.
Okay.
And there is a ton of questions, so we'll get to that in the last half hour when she is ready for them.
That'll work
about
about
let everybody know.
Right for the prepared remarks I have.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So hi, everyone. Welcome. I hope you're enjoying our show so far. We have same donation total so far. We are at 866. Yes, we are at 866. And that is absolutely wonderful. Don't forget, in the next hour left, the first 13 people to make a donation will get one of these great bottles. There are 13 of them. So the first 13 people to make any donation will receive one of these beautiful bottles. They come in multiple colors. You can make a donation by going to Correllians.live.com/donate. You can buy a reading. We have tons of psychic readings available. There's readings from Reverend Lord Don, Sir Ed Hubbard, and many, many others. The auction, you can find the auction at pagan.world. There are some auction items up right now. Fill out the bid form. You'll get a bidder ID number. You go in and you just put your bid number and the amount that you want to bid on that item. And that is absolutely a fun thing to do. See who's going to get that product at the end. And why we're doing this? Well, I've been to the last 3 parliaments. I've volunteered at the last 2. It is a beautiful experience, and it's something that we want to continue to do And, I heard somebody talking earlier about a free vacation. So I just want to clarify that it is not a vacation the way we're going. We're going there and we're working. We're going to bring our voice to the parliament for the whole community. We do interviews. We video workshops. We're working. It's not just all fun and games. We're not going out to dinner every second and stuff like that. It is an absolutely moving experience. If you would like to join us and register to attend the Parliament of World Religions, go to Correllian.com. On the main page, you will see a group rate page. Take that group rate. It is for all Correllians and friends of Correllians if you'd like to attend. It is available, I believe, until October 31st, if they do not extend it again. Fingers crossed, maybe they will. Also, we will have participation in the Parade of All Faiths the day before. So there's a lot of things that we are prepping for. And we hope you join us. We hope you make those donations. The only way that this works is with your help. We're also looking to secure a sponsorship and a booth to be able to bring more pagan information to the Parliament exhibit halls themselves. So that's another great thing. Check out those pages, pagan.world for the auction, Correllians.live/donate to make a donation. And also you can go to Correllians.live and see the readers that are available for readings. So with that all being said, I am going to bring our lovely guest back and have her continue. And don't forget, first 13 people to make a donation in this. I don't know why we can't really see it that well. My apologies. There we go. These great little spirit bottles. They are Murano blown glass, so there's 13 of them. First 13 donations will get one in the mail. Well, thank you, and we'll see you soon. And
Yeah, guys,
we're back.
donate. It's a good cause.
Donate. It is a good cause. Have you been to Parliament?
I have not. My late husband was.
Okay, I thought so, but I
Yes.
figured being from Chicago that you would have been
I
there.
wasn't living in Chicago then.
Oh.
In '93, I was spending a lot of time in North Carolina and such.
Oh, that's where I am now also.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I lived in a number of places in North Carolina over a number of years. It's too hot now. But be that as it may. So I'm going to touch on just a couple more things about the concepts of religion and such, and then we can go to questions. That would be great. Our ideas of what religion is very much going from the idea of Christianity and how Christianity has defined itself as a religion. In the West, we're always going to have Christianity in the culture. It's just the ideas are pretty overwhelming. One thing that I have noticed is that one of the aspects of the Christian mythos, the whole gestalt of Christianity, is the historicity of Christian origins. It all pretty much hangs on, there was this guy, Jesus, and he was a real guy, and he did all these things. And that's historically so. It's at this historical point in time, and we can, point at it. And there's a lot of early archaeology and stuff was not about finding out about old civilizations. It was about proving stories in the Bible. So there's a lot of weight of historicity around the Christian origins. Our origin myths are something that we don't call myths, but they're myths. And it's like Alexander's talking about his grandmother and different things like that. We have ways that we say things came about that our origin stories are actually origin myths. And we get, people can get defensive about that because we have from Christianity this idea that there should be a historic thing that actually really happened that makes this. Otherwise, it's not like, you can't just make this up. We do. We make it up out of the pot. Okay. We get this idea of what counts as religion. You know, oh, you're just a bunch of people meeting in a living room. That doesn't count as a religion. There's been a big uphill journey in the West on sorting that one out. And, you know, partially from the general public, and I think partially from ourselves too. This is where I think this gets very interesting, and I've just been putting together ideas on this. It's our stories about the gods. Again, because of Christianity, we have this predisposition to think that has to be historical something in it, that they're coherent stories with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we want the myths to make sense. Now, this gets into, you know, who stole from who. A lot of my first introduction to mythology and stuff was the Greek and Roman, and the way that they were presented in the earliest readings I did were coherent stories that had a beginning, middle, and end. But they don't necessarily. There can be a lot of contradictions. There can be, there must be, I don't know how many origin stories for Aphrodite. You know, did she step out of the sea? Did she come from here? Did she come from there? Was she on this island? She's on that island. That's because over 1,000 years or more, things get kind of mushed up. And it makes modern Western thinking people a little anxious. You know, we want to dig around to find out, well, the real story was, well, how do you reconcile this with that? Well, that's because this was told 500 years before that. And by the time you got to that, this wasn't important anymore. Still in the cauldron. But there's a lot of, when we go back and look at these vast areas of times, there's a lot of lack of coherency. And that can, we fill in the blanks of what we don't know, you know, to make the story make sense. And one of the more interesting things, I had this conversation with someone many years ago. As I said, my focus has always been sort of a Mediterranean basin. I'm very interested in Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Mesopotamia. Sumer is a special interest of mine. And then in some parts then of Wicca and witchcraft, as I got into the bigger world with the neo-pagans, I was just fascinated by the Celtic influence, at how important that was. And you can't put Celtic on Gerald Gardner because he was not interested in Irish stories. He was interested in British stories. And well, I know Celtic is not the same thing as Irish, but in the popular imagination, which we have to deal with, they're pretty equated. You know, I mean, yes, I know about Brittany and all that. But it's really connected to Irish. And I think it has to do because of the huge migrations of the Irish. And they were a late Celtic culture. Celts actually began somewhere around like Austria, moved west. So the Irish was a very late, or you could look at it very late or more recent. But they're very much conflated. Now the thing is, and this goes for a lot of Northern European up, if it wasn't a culture that put a lot of value on writing things out, oral traditions, we don't know that much. The Sumerian texts go back like 7,000 years. You could read poetry written to Inanna from 5,000, 7,000 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. But you look at the Celtic stories, and I remember being frustrated, thinking, well, there's all these gods. What's their myth? What's their story? And there weren't stories. We kind of have this idea about them and maybe these certain attributes. And beyond that, we fill in the blanks. And this person I was talking to about this years ago said a lot of people liked the Celtic gods without realizing it, but because they were a blank slate upon which they could project what they wanted.
That makes sense.
Yes. So it can be very powerful for that. But I think a lot of people who swear by their Norse or Celtic, what have you, ideas and the stories they tell themselves would be absolutely shocked to know how little factual information there is out there. I mean, you want facts about the Druids? Good luck. But we kind of fill in all this stuff, taking bits from across the history and fill in the bits that make us anxious and uncomfortable that there's a blank spot there.
Okay.
Yeah. So this very much affects our relationship with the gods, the stories we tell about the gods. And I don't want to make anybody feel queasy about their relationship with the gods. There is the idea that the ancient gods are so happy somebody's paying attention to them again that they accept a lot of things that in the past might have been errors or blasphemy. You know, I had an interesting discussion just recently on Facebook. I have a old friend who became an Egyptologist. And one of the things that she told me is that there is a henotheistic element to Egyptian religion. And henotheism means you acknowledge that there's lots of gods, but you're just worshiping this one. And what she told me was that in Egyptian religious protocol, you do not worship or have your worship services or your rituals to two gods at once. They don't like that.
Okay.
I'm not really jealous, but I'm jealous. You know, if you want me here, you want me, not both of us. And I was fascinated by that, especially since in the ritual context that I came up in, we regularly always used paired deities, female and a male deity, and very often used Isis and Osiris. Now, there's a big issue that I've been working on for years now about getting away from that gendered pairing of deity and ritual. And since I learned this about Isis and Osiris, I have not paired them in a ritual since. And I'm no longer real comfortable about saying, well, we got this one, who's her partner? You know, you can have Artemis and you can have Apollo, but you don't have to have both of them. What's the ritual really about? If it's really about Artemis, do it just Artemis. You know, if it's really about Isis, do just Isis. And someone on Facebook was saying, well, you know, I've done a lot of rituals that were with the two deities and it was just fine. And I, well, so have I for years. The issue is not that all that is now negated. The issue is now that if I know better, I should do better. So, you know, it's one thing for the gods to cut me slack because I don't know any better. It's another thing for me to say, oh, I know you don't like this, but I'm used to it, so I'm going to do it anyway.
Right.
And what did I say about things we're used to? We like doing things the way we're used to doing them.
Yes. So I have a question for you before we take our next break. Recently, I saw something that you had posted on Facebook, and it just drew attention to the fact that you were talking about Samhain and how some people are still saying Samhain, Samhain, and if you're going to
Yeah,
say that, call it the
yeah.
autumn equinox.
Oh God, that was a
Can you
mess.
talk a little bit about that and the how bad is it though, really, when somebody mispronounces? Because there's so many gods and goddesses out there.
Oh, I
It
know,
is
and
so
I, I,
hard to
I
really
really
remember.
I put my foot in it a lot on that, and
Oh,
I feel
it was
bad.
right. It was Mabon as in
Mabon.
rhymes as in cabin.
Yes, I
Mabin.
and they tell me it's not cabin, it's cabon. But even so, I thought at least get the first syllable right, because that's what really bugs me. Really, that pronunciation genuinely does
Right.
nails on the blackboard for me.
So and that's how I feel. And Eric just corrected me, and it was the Mabon when it wasn't Sam Hain and so on. But for me, it's when they
Right.
say Sam
Well,
Hain.
my feeling that Mabon and Mabon is like saying Samhain when you know it's Samhain,
Right.
you know. And it was a very unpopular opinion. And I kind of throw up my hands and say, okay, this is not a hill I'm going to die on. I'll never say Mabon except in an example like that.
Right.
And part of it is, again, this whole cauldron. It was from the 20th century. There was a guy, historicity. There was a guy at a specific point of time who decided it would be cooler than fall equinox if you said it Mabon instead. And the same thing with Litha and the same thing with Ostara. And I know this is quirky as hell, and I don't know how much it's just my personal neurodiverse quirks, but I don't like the way Ostara sounds, and I don't like the way Mabon sounds. I can live with Mabon, and I'm not crazy about Litha either, rather than Litha. But I don't know, Ostara.
I've never heard it. Litha
Yeah, Midsummer.
instead of Litha.
Yes, I've heard Litha.
Huh.
Oh yeah, I've been all over the country. Believe me, it is.
See, and that's just it. Depending on where you are in the country and how your pronunciation of what you're seeing, not realizing that most of these are from Gaelic words.
And that's because nobody knows how to pronounce Gaelic. My rule of thumb is if you pronounce it the way it looks, you're wrong.
Right.
And I have actually trained myself a little bit to be able to sight read Gaelic names and stuff, but I have no expert whatsoever. Every now and then I'll look at someone's name written out in Irish Gaelic, and I'll realize like, oh, that's that. And I get very excited about it. Yes, it's not Diosil, it's Jeshel. Things like that. But it's kind of such a mix anyway, because it was Gerald Gardner's innovation to come up with the Wheel of the Year, to come up with these 8 holidays. And in historical pagan worlds, every one of them was celebrated somewhere by somebody. But there was no culture that we know of that observed all 8. They might have done the solstices and not the equinoxes. They might have done the solstices and equinoxes, but not the cross-quarter festivals, the midpoint one, the seasonal one, and that thing. There's a real pleasing symmetry to the Wheel of the Year, where you have 8 equally spaced holidays.
Right.
And as somebody once said to me, and you get to have a party every 6 weeks. But in terms of historical paganism, no. In terms of contemporary paganism, 20th century, it's in there. I mean, if I came out and said, this is absurd, nobody should be doing the Wheel of the Year because fill in the blank, I would justifiably be roasted.
Right.
And I honestly have no problem with the Wheel of the Year, or actually in my
just the pronunciation of the words in it.
Yes, yes. And the arbitrariness, the very arbitrary name placements.
Right.
I think using Ostara confuses spring equinox way too much with Easter, when, as far as we know, there really isn't much of a connection. When I was first being trained, we called them the 8 great festivals, and the festival culture has actually ruined that way of saying that. But the 8 great festivals, and we had the cross-quarter names for some of them, but for the solstices and equinoxes, it was vernal equinox or spring equinox. It was midsummer or summer solstice. It was autumnal or fall equinox.
Right.
And they work just fine.
Yeah. Okay, so we are at the bottom of the half hour. We are going to take another video break and then get to some questions.
Yeah, love to.
Okay.
Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse. I am the first priest and chancellor of the Correllian Nativist tradition of Wicca, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the Road to Parliament 22 Correllians Live Telethon, 100 hours of magic and community. We're here to ask you to help us as we send a contingent to the Parliament of the World's Religions in August of 2023. We're going to give voice to you and to our community. During this 100 hours, our goal is to raise at least $10,000, and you can help us to do that. We humbly ask that you go to correllians.live/donate and give what you can. Then share this telethon and make sure those in your spheres know where and when to watch. Again, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the show.
On August 14th to 18th, 2023, the 9th Parliament of the World's Religions will convene in the city of Chicago. They are calling us together for a call to conscience, defending freedom and human rights. People and representatives of nearly all religions and faiths will be there to answer this call. And here is one of 6 reasons you should attend. Number 4, have your voice heard. Your attendance means something essential. By participating in conversations around the ways we can defend our freedoms and human rights, you can make a difference. By standing with your faith, community, and as a person of spirit, you can allow your voice to be heard in a unique way. Consider your commitment to defending freedom and human rights and attend the 9th convening of the Parliament of the World's Religions. If you wish to join the pagans to the Parliament, we have a special rate at Correllian.com, or just click the link in the description. Blessed be everybody.
What are you most looking forward to at the Parliament of the World's Religions?
What I'm most looking forward to at the Parliament of World Religions is learning about all the different types of religions that are out there, meeting the various clergy, and making new friends around the globe, and getting to know the other people and what they're focused on and what needs to be done to help me focus and teach others.
Why do we need representation at the Parliament?
Our attendance means something essential. By participating in conversations around the ways we can defend our freedoms and human rights, we can make a difference. By standing with our faith community and as a people of spirit, we can allow your voice to be heard in a unique way.
Who are the Sacred Order of Paladins?
The Order of Paladins is a service-oriented order dedicated to assisting our communities in moving towards a better, more sustainable stewardship of Mother Earth. And we are also dedicated to preserving Gaian culture today in order to support our civilization in the future.
Why support the Paladins?
Because we have had representation at every modern parliament, and we want to continue and expand on that with those of us who are attending in 2023.
What is the money going to be used for?
Most of the money we are looking to raise with our $10,000 minimum goal will go towards housing costs. Our plan is to house and feed all of us together for the week of the Parliament. Whatever money that remains when this goal is met will go towards bringing honored paladins in from other countries who would otherwise not have the opportunity to attend the Parliament. One such paladin is Reverend Sir Rolando Camon, whom we fondly call Apu Adman.
But we can't do it alone.
And that's ultimately why we are here, because we need your help. Thank you so much for watching and contributing in whatever way you can. Please donate to our cause at correllians.live/donate. Like our video feeds and share so that others can join us in watching what we have planned for you throughout these 4 incredible days and nights.
And there you have it. So again, go Correllians.live/donate, make a donation, and that would be a wonderful thing to help us out. And you have a half hour to be able to grab one of these little spirit bottles. They are fantastic. I have one in several colors. They hold a small amount of oil very well. And as I showed earlier, the tip has a little metal piece on it to keep the cork from absorbing your oil. So great. And we are back. Okay, you're unmuted.
All right.
There we go.
Terrific.
So,
Okay, so questions.
Okay, so I am going to actually let them play on the screen. In my opinion, he was a great man. I believe that they are talking about your husband.
Yes.
And
yes.
do the workshops, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was a hell of a teacher.
Yes. There was more willpower in witchcraft back in the days.
Maybe. I did touch on this earlier. I think that there was more of an emphasis on the movement of energy and how you put intention. I'll never like it, but I have to. It's there now and it's not going away. What is it that you're putting into a thing that now is called intention? You know, you can have an intention and you put something into it. I don't know how you put an intention. The terminology confuses me, and I think a lot of people don't quite know. If I ask what do you mean by putting your intention to something, it's a hard question to answer. Willpower is one way of describing that. Energy would be the way that I look at it. And the energy and movement energy and moving of energy through you, as opposed to pulling it out of you alone, is, I think, lost in a lot of the contemporary jargon of Instagram and TikTok witchcraft. It's hard to explain. That it's easier to explain when you're standing next to somebody and you can feel it.
Right.
It's harder to explain.
Yeah. And the next one, I'm going to put it up so we can read it together. As magic and witchcraft spread into the mainstream, what is your idea of how the drive and power of magic and witchcraft can be strengthened?
Well, it's kind of a broad question. I think that one of the things that I've said for many, many years is that I don't want witchcraft and paganism to be watered down in order to come into the mainstream. I want the mainstream to get wider. So to some extent, rather than presenting ourselves as hospital food, we should present ourselves as that spicy salsa. How can the drive and power? I think that's up to the individual witch to a very great extent. What are you willing to do to learn? What are you willing to admit you need to learn? Or the basic witch aesthetic and all that is all very well and fine, but witchcraft can have a lot of power. And I think that needs to be respected, and it's not always understood. For example, one of the things that's in the well of memes right now is the idea of a baby witch, meaning an inexperienced witch, although often it's young people too who will apply that word. And I know that that's in the well, it's in the cauldron, it's not going to disappear. But what I say is, when I hear someone calling themselves a baby witch, it's like, you're a witch, only your power.
Right.
And that idea of the power and potential transgressiveness of witchcraft doesn't fit in so pretty with the memes and TikTok. I'm not putting down TikTok, for God's sakes. I keep telling myself to get an account and give my 2 cents every day. But that idea of it's pretty and cute and everybody does it is missing a big chunk of it can be intense and dark, and yes, you really can make things happen.
Yeah. So the next one is from Eddie Jr. The Diana teachings with regard for summoning the elements was closely connected to Starhawk work. It got away from memorizing material and focused on coming from experience that are personal. So that means no script or not being exactly perfect.
Right. And that for those of you out there who are not really familiar with Starhawk, it's just something that 20 years ago you would never say.
Exactly. Or Lady Shiva for that. Yeah.
Everybody read Spiral Dance. But at any rate, she was coming out of a mixture of traditions. And because she was trained by Z Budapest, as I understand, and also by the Victor Anderson fairies. And although I understand what she meant about doing stuff very improvisational, because I work very improvisational too. I have terrible memorizing things. But what struck me over the years is that she and Scott Cunningham, who was 10 years later, was also promoting Make It Up As You Go Along. They both were very formally trained, and then they chose to improvise. So I think you get, if it's like what they used to tell us in art school is learn the rules so you can break them. And the breaking can be amazing. But if you don't know what the rules are to begin with, are you breaking the rules or are you flailing around? And I think it has given the mistaken impression that anything is good enough. And I will never forget one critique in a painting class I was in. I wasn't the one critiqued in this case, but we were supposed to show what we've been working on all semester. And this one young man had a small, very finely detailed painting of a zodiac wheel. And the professor, who was, he had paintings in museums all over the world. He's looking at this and he says, well, it's really kind of more of an illustration than a painting. And the sense being that it was, very precise and to order and nothing particularly interesting or anything about it. It was just very nice. Wheel of the air. And the school I went to was a little avant-garde. So that was a little, we weren't teaching commercial art. So anyway, but the young man got very upset at this. He says, you don't understand. You don't understand. This came right from my soul. And the professor just stood back and said, well, your soul isn't a very good painter. And so,
But did it come from the heart? I mean, it came from your soul and your mind.
right.
Yes.
So sometimes we have to look at that, whether you know what you're doing well enough that you can improvise, that you can, that your improvisations and your making up will have sufficient force to them. That it's like, I remember someone once said, "Oh, instead of calling the quarters, we always call it the quarters. So we're going to call the points of the triangle with maiden, mother, and comb." And it's like, on the surface, I guess that makes sense, but it doesn't understand this traditional Wicca ritual structure where you call the elements for a very specific reason,
right,
and you call deity in a very specific way. And this was just arbitrarily swapping one out from the other.
That
So
almost reminds me of the like gummy bear or the chocolate ritual.
that I know the chocolate ritual. I don't know the gummy bear.
they did one with gummy bears. I guess
I've
people
done-
want to have fun or like some kind of a Discordian ritual.
Yeah, I mean, and there's nothing wrong with. I am an initiate of the cult of Bill the Cat, which was the thing in the 80s. Thank you. So yeah, you can have fun with it, but the reason the Bill the Cat thing was fun.
I never heard that term, so please definitely explain.
Oh, Bill the Cat was from Bloom County comic strip.
Okay.
Yeah, and Bill the Cat was just this really beat up old cat that cross-eyed and didn't say much other than
okay.
But he was very popular back in the day. So if anybody wants to look up Bloom County, they can find out about Bill the Cat. But the reason it was funny is because it was playing on all of the standard bits of ritual that everybody was familiar with. It's like, how do you parody a Catholic Mass if you don't know how a Catholic Mass works?
Right.
For people who are familiar with it, it could be hilarious.
Okay. Yeah.
Or blasphemous, depending on your point of view.
We're going to go with hilarious.
Yes. But I have found that, the more solid you are in your basics, the more you've got to dance away from. The more that you can go out. If you don't know, if you have no idea why you're calling the elements to begin with,
right,
then how can you know that what you're substituting for it is equivalent?
Right.
And, like I said, I was lucky to be very well trained. And it breaks my heart that everybody doesn't get that opportunity.
Okay, let's see. And it's a lot of very good words about Isaac.
Mm-hmm.
And how he told and preached good stories.
That he did.
And thank you for sharing them. Yeah. So
yeah. I loved his humor. I think I fell in love with him when I read Real Magic, just from the humor.
How long were you married?
Not that long. Let's see. I first read Real Magic in 86. I didn't meet him until 89, at which time we were both married. We moved in together in 2003. We got handfasted in 2004.
Beautiful.
Married in, because finally all the divorces were clear. We got married in 2007, and he was dead before our third anniversary.
Oh.
So that was it was pretty devastating.
Yes,
yeah.
I can understand that.
So we were like an item for I don't know, 20 years. We knew each other for 14 years before we moved in together.
Very cool.
Mostly long distance, but there you are.
So there's a difference between influence and manipulating. I'm going to put this up front.
Oh, I would say absolutely, yes. Manipulation is something that is very frowned upon in our modern way of looking at spells and witchcraft. And some of it's ethical choices. You know, you don't want to force somebody to do something that is not what they want to do. But you can influence them much more ethically. And the story that Isaac used to tell was that if you want to improve your love life, you know, do you go wait in an alley and hit somebody with a club over the head and drag them into the alley and have your way with them? Or do you go and get a good haircut and make sure you're wearing decent clothes and present yourself well and do your work in magic, so it's like there's this big neon arrow pointing, look at me, look at me, look at me, I'm really cool. And then you meet somebody and they're attracted to that and they think this is all pretty cool, and then you meet happily in the privacy of someone's place and have your way because you mutually want to. Right. But manipulating is trying to get people to do something that you think they don't want to do or wouldn't do. There's some weird levels of manipulation. Like one thing that somebody calls you up and say, "What you doing today?" And you're like, "I don't know." "Well, do you want to go and do such and such?" "Not really, But, well, you already said you're free for the whole day." So that's a manipulation. If somebody calls and says, "Hey, I want to do this thing. Are you available?" That's, and you say, "Oh, wow, this is a cool thing with that person," then that would be more like influencing. So there's a lot of little ways that we consciously or unconsciously manipulate people. And there's a lot of ways that we can phrase our magic, phrase the way that we structure a spell that is about influencing. For example, with a get a job spell, I want the recruiter to look fondly upon my resume, right? And you could try and do something where you force the recruiter to privilege your resume, or you can do asking the gnomes who rule things of earth, so that includes money and jobs, asking the gnomes to go and whisper in his ear. You should pay attention to that. Take another look at that one. Doesn't it meet your requirements? There, that's pretty good. Take a good look at that one.
Right.
That's influencing. And we all have choices with that.
And Eddie is talking about something that Isaac used to preach, a good story he enjoyed. And I think it had to do, it cut off. It had to do with the witch wars. Here it goes.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So my personal best story from him was where the term witch wars came from close to home for me.
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not remembering that. He had so many good stories. That particular one is not ringing a bell right now. I only wish that he were here to tell the story himself.
As we all do. We do. And I'm going to add this into my ritual. You've been delightful. My magical. Okay, Eddie's magical name is Dana. Good to know, Eddie. Thank you. And well, thank you for prayers, for donations. We appreciate it. Wonderful.
Yes, indeed. Good people, good cause. Give money.
Thank you. Please. So if anyone is more interested in buying books, because I know you've written several, and getting in touch with you or finding out more about things that you're doing or coming up, how would they do that?
Well, I don't do as much as I used to by any means now. I'm not a young chicken anymore. But I am on Facebook. It's a public profile.
Mm-hmm.
You can certainly jump in there. I can't accept a lot of friends because I'm kind of maxed out on the Facebook friends, but you can follow If
Right.
you send a friend request, you'll automatically be following it. Almost all my posts are public.
Yes, they are.
So, right. So certainly you could do that. I occasionally still use the blog at neopagan.net, but honestly, most of my blog size writings right now turn up on Facebook.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you know, if it's longer than as long as a couple of paragraphs, I'll just put it on Facebook.
Very cool.
Although I have been thinking about using my blog, I found a stash of papers from the olden days when we didn't save everything on our computers. I lost one of my computers. I had one hard drive that had tons of writing on it.
That's
through
rough.
the 80s and 90s and stuff that it's gone. Long story, very long story. But I have found some printouts of some of that material. And I'm thinking that I should just, you know, as interesting, again, cauldron stuff. This is stuff where I was coming from. It was current at the time it was written, and put that on my blog.
Very
So
cool.
that would be my
And the blog you said, I'm going to type it in the chat for everybody to see, was NEO.
neopagan.net/blog.
Fantastic, right? NEOPANG.
Yeah, you're missing an O.
I did miss an O. I'm going to do that one more time.
I might have a link to that from my Facebook page, but I wouldn't swear to it. Yay.
Yay, there we go. And that is where you can read all her writings. Wonderful.
And
I have to tell you, it's been a pleasure listening to those birds in the background.
Oh, yeah. I hope they didn't drown everything out.
No, it is so beautifully peaceful.
My little goofballs. Yeah. Oh, God. I was at a pet store yesterday buying things for the birds, and they had all these baby birds, and I was just standing.
Uh-oh.
I just got these guys a new, bigger cage, and that means I've got the older cage. I could put 2 more birds in there. But no, just leave.
But do you want to feed and care and responsibility of 2 more?
Yeah. Twice as noisy, twice as messy, twice as expensive to feed. I know. I talked myself out of it. Oh, but they were so cute.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate everything.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much. You are so welcome. And what was the presentation? It was a fascinating presentation. Thank you for sharing it with us. Awesome. Have a wonderful time. Have a wonderful weekend. And again, guys, hit that donate button.
Make money.
Yes.
Give,
we're going to go take a video break. Thank you for being here.
I have a lot of respect for Correllians.
Oh, thank you. That's good to hear.
Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse. I am the first priest and chancellor of the Correllian Nativist tradition of Wicca, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the Road to Parliament 22 Correllians Live Telethon, 100 hours of magic and community. We're here to ask you to help us as we send a contingent to the Parliament of the World's Religions in August of 2023. We're going to give voice to you and to our community. During this 100 hours, our goal is to raise at least $10,000, and you can help us to do that. We humbly ask that you go to correllians.live/donate and give what you can. Then share this telethon and make sure those in your spheres know where and when to watch. Again, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the show.
On August 14th to 18th, 2023, the 9th Parliament of the World's Religions will convene in the city of Chicago. They are calling us together for a call to conscience, defending freedom and human rights. people and representatives of nearly all religions and faiths will be there to answer this call. And here is one of 6 reasons you should attend. Number 5. Become a part of the global peace movement. As you learn and share at the Parliament, you discover none of us are alone, and that people all over the world are working towards peace, a freer world, and the protection of human rights. Whether your service and goals are local or global, through the Parliament of the world's religions, you will be able to act. Consider your commitment to defending freedom and human rights, and attend the 9th convening of the Parliament of the world's religions. If you wish to join the pagans to the Parliament, we have a special rate at Correllian.com, or just click the link in the description. Blessed be everybody.
What are you most looking forward to at the Parliament of the World's Religions?
At the Parliament of World Religions in 2023, I'm personally looking forward to broad exposure and deep engagement with various wisdom traditions from around the world, particularly as regards pressing issues from today and future goals for our human journey. I expect that I'll be able to incorporate much of the learning back into my own personal path, as well as share tangible insights back into the metaphysical and spiritual community that I work within.
Why do we need representation at the Parliament?
Our attendance means something essential. By participating in conversations around the ways we can defend our freedoms and human rights, we can make a difference. By standing with our faith community and as a people of spirit, we can allow your voice to be heard in a unique way.
Who are the Sacred Order of Paladins?
The Order of Paladins is a service-oriented order dedicated to assisting our communities in moving towards a better, more sustainable stewardship of Mother Earth. And we are also dedicated to preserving Gaian culture today in order to support our civilization in the future.
Why support the Paladins?
Because we have had representation at every modern parliament, and we want to continue and expand on that with those of us who are attending in 2023.
What is the money going to be used for?
Most of the money we are looking to raise with our $10,000 minimum goal will go towards housing costs. Our plan is to house and feed all of us together for the week of the Parliament. Whatever money that remains when this goal is met will go towards bringing honored paladins in from other countries who would otherwise not have the opportunity to attend the Parliament. One such paladin is Reverend Sir Rolando Camon, whom we fondly call Apu Adman.
But we can't do it alone.
And that's ultimately why we are here, because we need your help. Thank you so much for watching and contributing in whatever way you can. Please donate to our cause at Correllians.live/donate. Like our video feeds and share so that others can join us in watching what we have planned for you throughout these 4 incredible days and nights.